Is death ultimately humanity's biggest fear? We're going to discuss that and other concepts. My dad's like, "What?" In Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. This is my father, Dr. Kaplan. Together, we are going through the law this year, Genesis through Deuteronomy. We are in Exodus at the moment. We're going to be reading Exodus 14:9 through 14, and I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we will discuss what we have read. And the Egyptians pursued them and overtook them encamped by the sea. All the horses of Pharaoh's chariots and his riders and his force at Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon. And Pharaoh drew near, and the Israelites raised their eyes, and look, Egypt was advancing towards them. And they were very afraid, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, "Was it for lack of graves in Egypt that you took us to die in the wilderness? What is this that you have done to bring us out of Egypt? Isn't this the thing we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone, that we may serve Egypt, for it is better for us to serve Egypt than for us to die in the wilderness?' And Moses said to people, 'Do not be afraid. Take your station and see the Lord's deliverance that he will do for you today. For as you see the Egyptians today, you shall not see them again for all time. The Lord shall do battle for you, and you shall keep still.'" All right. So we have this dramatic moment where the Pharaoh's chariots have arrived and they're all trapped. It's a very vulnerable moment to put his God. God put his people in a very vulnerable situation, and unfortunately, they do not respond very well. Even though they have, he's literally showing them his visual presence, right? The pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night. You just had the plague, all the plagues, including the plagues of the firstborn, where they were all spared, and yet what they're concerned about seems to be their mortality, which is intriguing because ultimately they seem to be suffering so poorly where they were before, right? And yet here they are being like, well, we would rather be alive in that state than be dead. Um, which does not, I mean, I don't. I guess I do want to. I don't want to sound too negative about people that want to preserve their own life because I don't think being nihilistic is right.
This
But on the
has
other,
this has to do with being in a rented vehicle where the license plate was from New Hampshire. It said "Live free or die,"
yeah,
so
no,
it's
no,
gotten into his system.
no. I'm just saying.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just saying.
yeah,
I'm just saying. I understand not wanting to be nihilistic about it
yeah.
exactly, but on the other hand, it's like, why?
What was your question in the beginning?
Dude, is ultimately the humanity's biggest fear death itself, and
It
I
seems
think
like it. Yeah.
I think it does seem like it, especially I would say for the, I don't want to sound too harsh to these people, but I'll just say it, to the unconverted mind, right? Because to a converted mind, life is temporary, life is vapor, life is, you enjoy it while you can, and then it's going to end, and there's another stage. And again, I don't want to sound overly, what you kind of call it. I don't want to sound too dismissive of life because that's not right either. I don't think you should just coast, you know. But on the other hand, it seems like when you don't have that sort of security, yeah, your biggest fear is going to be death itself. And it's amazing. I guess my point is ultimately with all this rant, it's amazing what people are willing to put up with in order to just be alive. And I think that can be really exploited, especially by oppressive power.
Well, good in a way. The survival instinct is very critically important, but
Sure.
there's also the concept of the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. You know, people.
Well, this was the devil they knew in both cases, right? It's either they're going to kill them there or they're going to be their
No, but
servant,
the thing
right?
is, you don't know what's going to happen after you die, and
Oh, that's true.
so
Well, it's kind of
that
this.
that
Unfortunately, it's kind of the victim mentality, right? It's a lot of times people that are victimized. When you give them the ability to make choices, it's like they don't exactly know because they've been so under the thumb of somebody else that the idea of choice is terrifying. There was a comfort in the abuse. It's like, unfortunately, people that come from abusive relationships, it can be like that. There can be a comfort to the abuse. It's like Stockholm syndrome, right? Where you're just, like you said, you're just used to it. You're so used to somebody bossing you around and being oppressive that even though you know it's wrong, the unknown of what will happen if you get freed from that is sometimes terrifying.
When you're in a crisis situation, you tend to, in some ways, gloss over the problems you had before. The so-called good old days that people talk about were not as good when they were going through them. But in retrospect, sometimes people talk about the so-called good old days.
Yeah.
And yet we have for example, we have so many more modern conveniences now than people had earlier.
Yeah.
But you tend to,
Right.
you tend to gloss over the past
Yeah.
when you're in a crisis situation.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah. And I know people were very would have heard me rant about how negative a lot of things are in the current state. However, I think one of the reasons why we've ended up in this state is because we did have the Bible getting spread around. We did have a lot of incredibly positive advancements in humanity in terms of our understanding on a lot of things, the way the world works, of progress in terms of morals. It was, I think people do think it's all just, and that's not really accurate. I think actually it's because we're in a state of a general better, we were in a better state is why we're taking for granted some of these things, right? Because we're seeing how far we came, and then we're kicking out all these columns
right,
that got us there, right?
right.
Which means it's more recoverable. So again, I'm trying to be optimistic. I try to be optimistic because you never know.
I,
Now,
I had read somewhere, I may be wrong on this, but this concept, because there were no graves in Egypt, it may be sarcastic, but there may also been a different way they dispose of the dead in Egypt. I don't know if they cremated them or what, but there may be some historical, implied historical background here that I read about at one time but don't recall.
well, maybe too the way they were dismissive of them, because I mean, if you think about slave culture, and often, especially or any sort of the other culture, a lot of times the primary people don't treat even their dead all that well.
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
could be that they were saying, well, I mean, sure, they maybe didn't give us a glamorous funeral, but is that really a reason to drag us out here? Like you said.
yeah.
Now, in terms of sarcasm, this is interesting because it says, "Isn't this the thing we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone'?" Which this has never been mentioned before in the text. So there's two options. Either the text just didn't mention it because it's giving it to us now, or they're lying and they literally didn't say that before, and they're kind of rewriting history, saying, well, we never really wanted to get out there. Why did you do that in the first place? And I'm
Uh,
more inclined to believe it's the latter, just based on the way humans tend to work. I'm more inclined that they didn't actually, when Moses came in, say, hey, you know what? We don't really want to be free.
well,
We'd rather just be
they
here.
were upset when he said, "Make bricks without straw." And
True.
they said, you put a sword in his hand to kill us." So at that time, maybe they felt that way. Not when
But they never said it's better for us to serve Egypt than to die in the wilderness. They never seem to be, because
well,
that's what it
no,
says. It says
yeah, right.
that didn't seem to be a concern
No,
before.
right, yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
thinking, I'm not so sure that
You,
they're being honest
yeah,
here.
okay, good point.
I don't know. I mean, it could be, just because the text didn't mention it doesn't mean that they didn't say it. I'm just saying,
Well, there might have been a certain minority that did,
you're right.
and now they're leaning on them.
And I think that's
Yeah,
honestly what the story is about. And I'll get back to what I was saying about we don't know how many people were involved in this, right? I think we have an escalation going on. I think you probably start with
yeah,
a few rebel rousers or whatever,
right,
and it just
yeah,
grows and grows and grows and grows to the
right,
finally you get to the spy era, and it's just they're
right,
kind of they just
right,
the rot just took over.
right, yeah, right.
And I mean, maybe that's overly generous, but I tend to try to be
A little, a
try to
little,
be
a little
generous.
leaven leavens the whole lump.
Well, exactly,
Yeah,
right? Wasn't that a great parallel for this?
yeah.
Now, uh, he says, take your station, see the Lord's deliverance, and then he says, the Lord shall do battle for you, and you shall keep still. So he's specifically setting up this situation because later that will not be the situation. But this situation, he's saying, not only will you be delivered, but this is not going to be a hand to hand conflict situation. This is going to be a situation where I'm going to divinely intervene and you're going to have to do absolutely nothing, essentially.
In 1 Corinthians 10, Paul compares this event to a baptism. I'd like to make a comment on that.
Sure.
Uh, Many times, I think you'll find in your own life or in the lives of others that there's a pretty serious challenge right before baptism
Hmm.
and then a deliverance that occurs. So the person is kind of given a jump start when they begin this Christian life. I think in many cases that would be the experience that people go through. I know in my case I had that, and I had some challenges in my university training. I had this last minute crisis that might have kept me from graduating, and somehow it all worked out right around the time I was baptized.
Interesting. But if you draw a parallel to this, what you would expect, if this is something that's going to happen on a regular basis as kind of a reoccurring pattern, you would expect it would be something where, like what you said there, it kind of works out. This is not going to be the time where you have to go through storming in with a sword in order to conquer it. That this is that God maybe divinely involves himself in order to give you that, like you said, that jump start.
Right.
So that's cool. I like it. I'd be curious to know if you had a similar situation. Comment below. It'd be interesting to know if you feel like the pattern holds there on that. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that this is specific for this time, right? And this is where you have to be careful with what you do with biblical verses. I do not necessarily know for sure that people cherry pick this one out and use it as like a quote and put it on their wall or something. But I would say it would be one that you might be tempted to do so, but you have to be careful, because just because they were told they were going to keep still at that point, obviously that's not going to be always the case. In fact, just a little bit next few segments, we're going to see they're going to have to battle, right? So so I'm just saying, be careful that these very poignant moments where God's like, this is going to happen and blah, blah, blah. Yes, true. And there are going to be situations where you can keep still and God will intervene for you. However, there are situations where you are going to have to fight too. And I don't even mean just physically. You're just going to have to get into the trenches yourself.
There's a Jewish tradition regarding Nachshon ben Aminadab, whose name will come up eventually, that the sea didn't split until he put one foot into the water, then it split. That's the Jewish tradition. Obviously, it's not in the Bible.
No.
But it's basically going along.
That's kind of more like the Jordan, though, right? Because the Jordan, they literally had to walk towards it, and then it split at the last second, right? Right? Because wasn't it like right before their foot touched the water that it split for the Jordan?
Well, but
we'll get to that later. Red Sea, the Red Sea of the Sea of Reeds, it was like all night. They got to like what? It wasn't like the Ten Commandments. It was this slow process.
Yeah, that's
so to me, I think there actually is a difference in the crossing. I think the Jordan was more of a test of them. It's like, are you going to just walk out on faith and let it happen? Whereas this is
all through the night.
Like it says, you shall keep still. It's like this isn't that kind of situation. This is a situation where just step back and observe.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Right. You're not expected to have to put yourself out there.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not asking that of you right now. Right. Now, like I said, later, not very long from now, they will be asked to do that. But not right now.
But part of that was because of their own attitude.
Yeah. Well, I think to some degree, God did have to demonstrate to them that, yes, you don't actually have to do anything. That's kind of the whole point. I have your back. On the other hand, like I said, they will be asked to do things. So it goes back and forth. All right. Anything else before we move on and we get through the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds?
Let's plunge in.
All right. If you're enjoying this, please like, subscribe, hit the bell. It's a great year to read the Bible, and we will see you tomorrow.